Well, I'm down to the last stage of this project here. I have my bumper built and installed, and the winch is wired up and working just fine. But the last part of this is to wire up these lights. Right now, their connectors are just dangling here, and they're not actually wired up to anything. Now, even though these are LED lights, they actually draw quite a few amps. They're pretty powerful, and so instead of running a 10 gauge wire back into the cab through the switch and back out to these lights again, when I first set up this truck, I actually put in some provisions for some accessories. I'll show you what I got here. Now, instead of adding a big mess of zip ties and flex loom and everything, all I really have to do is just add another relay in here, fuse to power it, and then just run some signal wires back into the switches in the cab. And the switches will control the relay, which will switch power to the lights. And so this is a really neat way of doing this. I had details on it in a previous video when I was first setting up this truck, but I'll go ahead and put a link in the video description again if you guys are interested in setting one of these up in your own vehicle. In the cab here, I have a set of switches. I know the shifter's kind of in the way, but I've got backup lights, which I haven't added yet. I've got the off-road lights, which is this is going to control the lights that I just installed on the front bumper. And then I already have a working air compressor in here, but I don't have any way to turn it on and off. It doesn't leak, so really that hasn't been a problem. But if, going over some brush or something, if one of my employees ends up ripping an air line off and it does start running continuously, I don't want to rely on them having to find the fuse to unplug that. So I'm just going to add this switch in here. And since I got to run the bundle of wires up to the fuse panel anyway, or up to the relay panel anyway, then this is a good time to wire in that switch. So let's get to it. It's time to open up that dash and start running some wire. Now, this project I've kind of divided up into my head into two major steps. The first step is going to be to wire these four lights together, all the positives and negatives, and get that bundle of cables up here to where I've got my relay box. And I like to use existing grounds wherever possible. Fortunately, we've got this one, I don't know if you can see it down in here. It's right there. It's a nice and convenient one, a factory body ground. And then the relay is going to switch the positive to all of these lights here. So that'll be step number one. And then step number two is going to be to put the bundle of wires together, the signal wires and the power supply for my switch panel that I'm going to be putting in the dash. So basically each one of these switches is going to be switching 12 volts, but it's just going to be at signal level. So it's just going to be a couple hundred milliamps, enough necessary to run the relays. So those are the two major projects. We're going to get started by wiring all these lights together, and then we can test it and get some satisfaction out of seeing all the lights light up. Well, since this outer bumper shell is removable, I want to be able to remove it without having to cut any wires. And so if I solder the wires to these flange mount lights here, I'd have to cut it every time I want to remove the bumper shell. That's not the end of the world, but I'd like a little bit better installation than that. These lights already have weather pack type gasketed connectors that they come with, so I'll just wire up to these and I don't have to make any changes there. But these lights, they just come with this end right here with these bare wires. So what I'll be installing on those is this weather pack connector. And so this is just a 2-conductor connector. Basically, I've got a pair of male pins and female pins that fit together the wire gaskets here, and it's pretty easy. You basically just put the wire in there, crimp it with a crimp tool, and then snap the connector in here, and then snap that closed, and then you have this nice gasketed weather tight connector. It only takes a couple of minutes for each one, and this will allow me to disconnect these lights if I ever need to remove the bumper shell. So there you have it. This is crimped and ready to go. The gasket right here will seal off the inside of the connector from any moisture. So I just got to crimp the other male one on there and then move on to the next one. This one's wired up. Now I can do the other side, and then we'll make up some matching female connectors. Well, since I'm soldering these connections, I'm using this helping hand thing here just hanging on the license plate bracket, and that holds all my wires in place, so while I'm soldering it frees up my hands for the solder, and the iron works pretty good. I've got my harness made up here. These are the two connectors to supply the two flange mount lights here. And this is where my power is going to be coming in from. And all this is tied together to supply these two lights. So basically this whole bundle is just going to kind of go in here and around the back side of the bumper. I'll fish these two down to the two flange mount lights. So I'm going to plug these things in, and then just for my own satisfaction, I'm going to tap this to the battery terminals and see all four of these lights light up. I pulled out this fuse panel thing right here, just kind of show you quickly how it works. What I've got is this heavy gauge like car stereo or amplifier wire coming directly from the battery, feeding this whole thing, and then I've got it broken up, and so it supplies one side of all of these fuses down here. And then for the air compressor, that's this one right here. That's the only relay I'm currently using. So the other side of this fuse supplies this 40 amp relay right here, and then the pressure switch on the air compressor is this white wire right here. So I'm actually switching a ground to this, activate this relay here. So it's this fuse where my thumb is that supplies this relay, and that's for the air compressor. So I'm going to put another relay in here somewhere else and add another fuse in the bottom here to supply that. We'll use this one down here at the very bottom. Well, this may look like there's a lot going on here, but it's really not too bad. So what I've done is I've added this red supply wire. This goes back to supply the switches to all of its fused constant 12 volts. This blue wire is a signal. This will come from the switches to control this bottom relay right here for the lights. And then this orange wire is a signal. The air compressor switch is going to send 12 volts to this top relay right here. Now the 12 volts from the switch is not going to automatically turn this relay on. The ground side of the relay gets its signal from the pressure switch for the air tank. So the switch in the dash is basically an on permissive for the air compressor, which means that then the pressure switch can control the on-off. I'd like to test all this before I put it away. And so our blue one, see, I think I said the blue one was for the lights. So I've got it right here. I'm just going to put it on this battery terminal here, and I should hear the relay click and see the lights turn on. So it looks like it's working good. I'll test the air compressor in a similar manner. And then something else I really need to do, I actually don't know how many amps all of these lights are drawing. I could look up the specs for each one, but a better thing to do is I have a clamp-on ammeter that will measure DC current. And if I just clamp it onto this line right here and then turn those lights on, that'll tell me how many amps that the lights are drawing altogether. And then I'll know if my fuse is sized appropriately. I expect it to be in the vicinity of 20 amps or so, which should be well within the capability of the 30 amp fuse and the 40 amp relay I put in. But it'd be nice to know so I don't melt anything down. I'll grab that and set it up here and take some measurements. All right, I've got my Fluke 337 here set up to DC amps, and I have it zeroed. Let's put this thing on here and see what we get. 24.5 amps. So that's good. That's maybe a couple amps more than I expected, but the 10 gauge cable that I used, the 30 amp fuse, and the 40 amp relay should be sufficient to power these things without something melting down. Well, with everything wrapped up under the hood, it's time to move inside. This is my power wire and my signal wires to the relay box. And I'm just going to kind of route them carefully up here to make sure I'm not interfering with linkages, steering column, everything like that. I have a chassis ground I can pick up right there, or a body ground. I'm going to send all of those to this switch panel right here. Now I know that on some trim levels this insert right here is different and it has a series of switches. And I thought about buying one of those and trying to retrofit these other switches in here, but I can always do that in the future fairly easily because I'm going to be wiring in plugs on the back of these switches. But for now, this 3-gang switch panel happens to almost pop perfectly right here in this cubby. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to put a dab of glue around the exterior of this, so if I want to, I can pry it out of here, pop it out later without too much effort, because it doesn't quite, I mean, it snaps in there, but it doesn't quite stay. Now the switches I ordered from a company called Over the River and Through the Woods, and I'll put a link in the video description down here, but basically I've got switches for my backup lights, for off-road lights, and those will control the lights on the front bumper. And then for my air compressor right here, and this will make the air compressor on permissive, so when it's turned on, then the pressure switch controls it. And on the backs of these, instead of running spade terminals to each one of these connections, I've ordered a terminal block that plugs into the back here, and will actually clip the terminals in here, and that way it'll be easier in the future if I have to unplug this. I won't have to keep track of all the individual wires going back in there. I've drilled a hole in the corner of this thing, but I can't quite reach it. I found that a piece of steel TIG wire is a good alternative to fish tape when you've got a tight area to work in. Now that I've got that in there, let's see if I can reach it back in here. There she is. Now I can use this end down here and tape it together with my wires and pull it on through. Okay, that's about all the ground that I've got. Okay, this is probably the most inappropriate part of my entire wiring job here, but I need to tie into the dash lighting circuit. So when the headlights are on and the dash lights are on, the switches will be lit up. The easiest place I found to do that here is to tie into the red wire that goes to the hazard flasher button, and that is part of the dash dimmer circuit. And I've just used this little 22 gauge wire here. There's only going to be a couple hundred milliamps going through it. The reason it's probably the least appropriate part of this wiring job is I've used one of these splice connectors. Normally I don't like those things, but for something that's, you know, protected here behind the dash, is only going to be carrying a few hundred milliamps and is just part of the lighting circuit, well, I'll go ahead and let this one slide instead of splicing into that and doing some soldering. Okay, whenever you order switches from these guys, they include this cool switch diagram or pin diagram for each one of the switches you've ordered. So this is the kind that I've ordered. You can see the back of each switch matches up with that diagram. And basically what we've got is we've got an upper and a lower lamp, and the upper lamp is going to come on whenever the switch is turned on, and the lower lamp is the that's part of the dash lighting circuit. And so we're going to hook ground up to terminal 7 and a ground up to terminal 8, and these are our grounds for our two lights. We're going to hook 6 to the dash lighting circuit, and then 2 is going to be my power supply, going to be my red wire coming from my fuse panel, and then 3 is going to be the out from each switch. And rather than wiring individual spade terminals to each one, I'm going to use the terminal block that that's compatible with these switches. And what that means is I'll I'll put the female spade terminals and lock them in the block, and then if I ever need to remove this switch panel, I just have one block to remove for each switch instead of a bunch of little individual terminals. Okay, I've got my terminal blocks wired up here. I've got the grounds all daisy chained for the backlighting, and same thing with the power. This one will hook to the power coming out of the cubby, and I'll crimp another terminal on that, hook that up to this one. Same with this except for the backlighting, and same with this except for ground. And then I'll have my 3 outputs that I've got to crimp on and put in here, and then I can plug the whole assembly into my switch block here. Then the whole thing should be ready to go. I got these these blocks all wired up, and I'm ready to put the switch panel in. There we go. Let's see if these off-road lights... let's see if these lights work. They do. And let's try our dash lights. Awesome. Alright, all that's left to do is to mount this panel with a couple of dots of glue in there, and then this job will be done. Yeah, let's test these things out here. I turn on my lights. I get backlight, so that's good. My backup lights don't have anything hooked up to them yet, so I'm not going to worry about those. I'm going to switch on the off-road lights. Those work fine. Then my air compressor. Perfect. Actually, I should make sure that this turns off. Hey, perfect. Alright, my switches all work properly. Let's take a look at these off-road lights. And let there be light. Yeah, it's like igniting a supernova in front of my pickup. Alright guys, that's it for this video. We're done with the bumper project on this Nissan. So what's next? Well, the weight of the front bumper and the winch has caused the front to sag maybe 3/4 of an inch or so. So I think next step's going to be a leveling kit. I don't really want to do a big lift or anything, but look for that coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll do something to level out this truck. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed.